talking about the causes of the Civil War, the American Civil War. Alright, so Manifest Destiny, that's going to kick off the whole idea behind what we're going to be talking about. Does anybody know anything about Manifest Destiny? Christian.
It's our basically the idea that we should occupy the entire continent, coast to coast.
Within the United States?
Well, within the United States,
okay.
yeah. Not like
just
a little
clarifying,
continent.
so you don't think it's like a worldwide takeover. Did you have something to say, Jonas?
No, I was just saying the same thing.
Same thing, right? Done?
And isn't it like a God's will?
Yep.
Kind of that we do
Yeah, it's
this?
like a God-given right. Okay. So this began in the 19th century, which is going to be the 1800s. And as Christian said, it's the belief of westward expansion. So right here, you can see the Mississippi River is kind of the cutoff for where we're at. That's the current United States up until 1803. In 1803, we're going to have the Louisiana Purchase, and that's when Thomas Jefferson came in, and he bought all of this land. See the green? He bought all of that from France, and it doubled the size of the United States. And the thing about this is, you have to think about what are they going to do with the land once they gain it. Are they going to allow slavery to keep moving west? Are they going to try to cut off slavery? Because the North is for the slavery, and the South is against it. So we'll see how that plays out. So the Missouri Compromise. This is one of the first states that comes out of the Louisiana Purchase, and it is right here next to all the Union states. And the question arises of whether it should be a free state, meaning that there is no slavery allowed, or if it's going to be a slave state. And so the North is obviously against wanting it as a slave state, and the South is going to want it as a slave state. And so, kind of as a compromise, they agreed to let Missouri currently be a slave state, but for the North to accept that, they put what was called the Missouri Compromise line, which you can see right here, and that prevented slavery from going on anywhere above that red line. So to kind of help the North get something out of this deal. And that's the latitude of the line. I'm going to write that on the board first. I'm going to put up a timeline so we can kind of follow the events going on, because there's going to be quite a bit. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise is eventually going to lead us to what was known as the Texas Annexation and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Texas Annexation got us all of this land that's currently known as Texas, and this is the treaty that ended our war with Mexico. And in part of the treaty that ended it, the land that we got was all the red that you can see right there. Now the question arises is, are we going to let the slavery keep expanding westward more, or are we going to try to cut it off? And as you can see, much of the land is below that line that was set up for the Missouri Compromise. And so now Congress has to figure out what to do with all of the land that they've just gotten from Mexico. And as you can see, we've kind of skipped about 30 years here, and notice how nothing was really going on with slavery until this happened. When we gained more land, it kind of reignited and brought back the issue of slavery, and what are we going to do about it? Alright, the Compromise of 1850. So this is eventually the document that's going to have them determine what to do with that land that they just got from Mexico. And basically what happened was the North gained California as a state. So they joined the Union, which is very key because that allowed them to have the advantage in the Senate, so they could help pass laws against slavery which is why they were okay with this compromise. However, the South did get something out of this. The Utah and New Mexico territories would have no slavery restrictions on them. So that would allow for the expansion of slavery only within that part on here. So if you take the Missouri Compromise line here, they would still allow it just a little bit above here, but only because the Union was getting California in return. That's the only reason they were allowing that. Because that Missouri Compromise line is very important to the Union. Okay, another part of this was known as the Fugitive Slave Law. And this was kind of something that the South wanted put in there just to say, hey, we have a little more power over you. It further fueled slavery, and it required any runaway slaves that were escaping from the South, and they might have escaped to the North somehow, but if they were to be caught by like a U.S. Marshal or any form of law enforcement, they would be required to be returned to their like masters down in the South by law. So before we go on any further, we're going to talk about the northern economy and kind of what their lifestyle was like. So does anybody really know anything about the Industrial Revolution at all?
Didn't it start in like 1870?
Like 1850. It started in England, and then it kind of worked its way over to the United States. And that's when machinery and factories and urbanization really came into play, because they're all about producing now. They're not worried about like agriculture, and we'll talk about how the South is involved with that. So urbanization, that's where a lot of people are coming together into one smaller area. So like big cities, so that way they can have jobs to work in the factories. Another key part is they have railroads, which allow them to move coal and lumber in large quantities across the country. And this is something important to remember for later on. The South population is 3 times as large as, or I'm sorry, the Union is 3 times larger than the Southern population. Okay, so now the Southern economy, this is the reason they've been fighting to expand slavery and allow it to continue, because their whole economic system relied purely on slavery. And it was agriculturally based, meaning that all of their things came from, cash crops, which are like tobacco and cotton and indigo and things of that nature. But the main one is cotton, and that was important because they could export that to Europe. And as we talked about, the Industrial Revolution was going on in England, and they would then take the cotton that was sent there and make a finished product out of it. So, like shirts and textiles. And not to defend the South, but to give them some justice, I guess you could say, most of the world at this point is still agriculturally based. They're not like the Union. The only 2 really industrialized places in the world are like the northern United States and England. The rest of it is pretty much, just grow crops. And they were less into railroads because they could rely on the rivers. There was a lot of rivers in the South, so if you grew cotton, say in Alabama, you could put it on a river and send it all the way to one of the ports on the eastern coast and send it out to England. Alright, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So this was dealing with the land above the Missouri Compromise line, which, remember, slavery was forbidden above that line. And the Utah area is above that, but remember, California was given to the Union to help kind of balance that out. So it was a mutual agreement. This, on the other hand, is not. They're trying to determine whether Kansas and Nebraska will have slavery or not. And remember, and as we discussed, the Missouri Compromise forbids slavery above that line. And it was similar to the Compromise of 1850 because it allowed the states to determine if they wanted slavery in them or not. Like these areas could decide if they wanted slavery or if they did not. And the same thing here. But remember, it's above this line. So now the Union is going to be mad because slavery is going to be allowed past that line where they agreed that it wouldn't be allowed anymore. And so it kind of just like took off this, which is what was keeping them intact for over 35 years. That's what was keeping the country in one piece, was this line. And now that the line's gone, everyone's just out for themselves at this point. Okay, so the Dred Scott decision also plays a part in this. It ruled that slaves were not U.S. citizens, and slaves were considered the property of their owners, and property could not be taken without due process of law, which is the Fifth Amendment in the Constitution. So basically this allowed any southern slave owners to go wherever they wanted with slaves. They could go west, north, wherever they wanted because the Supreme Court ruled that they could. And 5 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices were South and pro-slavery, so that also played a big part of it. Alright, so before we go on to the election of 1860, I have a little activity for us. So I want you guys all to come up and grab one of the papers off the table, or you can pass it around, either way. Alright, so before you read those, I want you to listen to this question that you need to answer, okay? Alright, so this is the question you're going to be answering. Would your persona agree or disagree with the expansion of slavery, and why? I'll give you a second to look those over and come up with some thoughts.
What was the question? One more time, sorry.
So the character that you've been given,
Okay.
are they for the expansion of slavery, or are they against it?
Okay.
And why are they that way? Alright, is everybody ready? Who wants to read theirs first? Jonas?
You want me to read?
Yeah, read your character. Just say like, I am...
I am a country doctor. I believe that slavery will eventually die out as the South grows more industrial. I am concerned that the majority of presidents have been slaveholders.
Alright, so do you think they would be for the expansion or against it?
Against it.
You think so?
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
Because we think that it will just eventually die out, so I don't want to keep stocking the fire.
Yeah.
How it goes.
Makes sense. Christian?
I am a wealthy tobacco planter originally from New York.
Okay.
I own 250 slaves, and I believe that slaves are better here than Africa. And I'm also a U.S. Senator. I think that's what it says.
Yep.
Yes. I definitely would be for slavery because my tobacco plants aren't going to grow themselves, and I've got 250 slaves, and if I lose all of them, then I'm broke.
Brandon?
I have a small farm. I resent the plantation owners who would like to see them overthrown. I believe Southerners should invest their money on industry instead of agriculture. I see slavery as evil.
So what would you say?
The last statement says it all. I'd be against it.
There you go. Alright, very good. That's just to kind of help instill the ideas from each side, the North and the South. Alright, so moving forward, let's see. Okay. So the election of 1860 is going to be a really big breaking point here. So this is where Abraham Lincoln eventually becomes the president. He wins the presidency. And he only got 40% of the popular vote. So if he only got 40% of the popular vote, how did he end up winning the election?
The Electoral College?
Yep, Electoral College. And why would the North have more delegates than the South for the Electoral College?
Bigger population.
Yep, because remember, as we said earlier, the population is 3 times larger up there than it is in the South. I don't know if you can see the numbers here, but some of the larger ones, New York, 36, 27, 23, and if you look down here, 4, 3, 3, 10, see how they just completely outnumber them when it comes to the Electoral College. And yep, larger population is more delegates. Alright, now the Southern secession in 1860, this is in response to Lincoln becoming the president, because now the North has the power in the presidency, and the South has pretty much said, we don't want to be a part of this anymore, we're going to break off from the Union and create our own state. And they called it the Confederate States of America. Oops. And as a response to this, the Union got together and they said, well, to help prevent the country from breaking into, maybe we can extend that Missouri Compromise line all the way to the coast and just keep it that way so we don't have to keep arguing. But they eventually decided not to do that and allowed them to form their own country. And the Union did not use any force. They just allowed it to happen, and we're trying to come up with like a game plan. What are we going to do? And this eventually led to Fort Sumter in 1861. So Lincoln put Union Army in South Carolina, just kind of, to be there just in case anything were to happen or anything were to arise. And eventually the South felt unsafe, and they attacked on Fort Sumter, and that officially began the war. So why do you think the South would attack first?
It's a preemptive strike. They're worried because they see the Union massing troops on their border. I mean, think about this. You're a country, or you're an attempt at being a country that's not really organized quite yet.
Right.
You see troops on your border. What are you gonna do?
Right. So they were, they're already like unstable because they're just forming this new country, or this new country to them, and they're kind of fearful. And when they see the Union coming in, they're like, well, they're probably going to attack us, so we may as well attack them first. And that's all the events leading up to the Civil War. Next class, we'll talk about the actual war itself.